Areena.
In this review of 2024, we look back at the past 12 months of news from Finland, covering everything from a new Finnish president to industrial unrest to a public healthcare crisis. Hello and welcome to All Points North and to our review of what's been making the headlines in Finland throughout 2024. I'm Ronan Browne.
And I'm Zena Iovino. And as we do every December, we'll look back over the past 12 months of news in Finland, a year which has seen a new president and Finland's further integration into NATO as Russia's war in Ukraine continues.
Yes, indeed, and lots more besides that. But we're going to start back in the first week of January when Finland was preparing to elect that new president. There were 9 candidates initially vying to replace Sauli Niinistö, but it seemed like there was only one topic on voters' minds.
That's right. It's foreign policy stupid, as our colleague from Yle's political news department, Ari Hakahuhta, told us, spinning that phrase, it's the economy stupid, which of course was made famous during Bill Clinton's 1992 U.S. presidential election campaign.
But the main issue, of course, is how the voters evaluate which of the candidates could be the best choice for Finland, who could be the most capable in dealing with Russia and in dealing with the war in Ukraine and dealing with new membership in NATO.
So the election kept us very busy during January, and by the end of the month, those 9 candidates had been whittled down to just 2, Alexander Stubb and Pekka Haavisto, as the second round kicked off at the beginning of February.
And we caught up with both candidates on the campaign trail. Here's Alexander Stubb.
I'm just going to be myself. I don't believe in courting as such. I think Finnish voters are very rational. They make a rational and free choice. They look at who might be the candidate to navigate us through rather stormy waters in international relations. They might look at who they want their country to be represented by around the world. They will look at what kind of capacity does the potential president have in being commander-in-chief in what I call NATO Finland, integrating our defense into NATO. And then finally they look at the value base and they make a rational choice on that. So these elections are very much based on personality rather than political view.
And of course, as I'm sure our listeners are well aware, so there's no need for a spoiler alert here, Alexander Stubb did indeed become Finland's 13th president. And we were there at his victory party, where we heard from the new First Lady, Suzanne Inns Stubb, who of course is originally from the UK, so she was making history by becoming the first foreign spouse of a Finnish president.
It's a huge honour. I mean, Finland has been my home now for 15 years, but to take on this position would be a massive honour and a huge privilege.
Okay, and what would be your priorities then for your time as First Lady, if I can say it like that?
Well, I don't know definitely what are the expectations of the role and what would absolutely be required, but there are some subjects that I'm interested in trying to push forward, and one is family well-being, how we can bring people together through sports and music, because I'm interested in both of those. I think there's a need to work, and I'd be interested in working with people who are excluded from society in some way, because, for example, they're old or older and lonely or on their own, or immigrants who have who need to integrate better, or young people who have had difficulties.
We looked into another aspect of foreign policy during February as Finland debated whether it should adopt the principle of reciprocity when granting dual citizenships. Now, that's a mouthful, but this essentially means that Finland would only grant dual citizenships to citizens of countries where the same reciprocal rights are available to Finns.
Yeah, we heard a lot of that term during February, and the debate is essentially centred around the granting of Finnish passports to Russian citizens, with many politicians and analysts flagging up security concerns. In fact, the issue came up during the presidential election, with 7 out of the 9 candidates saying Finland should stop granting dual citizenship to Russians.
We heard from Olga Davidova-Mingway, a Russia expert at the University of Eastern Finland.
Actually, Russia already
before that declared in many programs and many laws that it has a right and a responsibility to protect and defend its citizens abroad. Eventually, when Crimea was annexed, it was realized by everybody that Russian citizenship may be used instrumentally by Russia, and it has done it before already many times.
Now, that debate about dual citizenship is still ongoing as we reach the year's end, with the Interior Ministry set to publish a report on the issue soon.
We now move into March, when thousands of Finnish workers were out on strike.
Yeah, indeed. Who can forget? This months-long dispute between unions and the government actually began in the autumn of 2023, and it continued throughout the winter and spring of this year. The strikes really peaked in February and March when public transport was brought to a standstill, factories and harbours were shut down, and even daycare centres closed their doors.
Now, that dispute had its roots in the government's 4-year program, which includes proposals such as eliminating the need for employers to pay sick pay for the first day of sick leave, another measure which would make it easier for employers to fire employees, and a plan to reduce earnings-related unemployment benefits, among other things.
Yeah, so on All Points North, we heard from Pekka Ristela of the Blue Collar Trade Union Confederation SAK, and he told us why workers were out in such large numbers.
I'd say it's the overall package that the government is planning or partly taking through. The cuts in social security, the cuts in direct cuts in workers' rights, but also the systemic change to the labour market system, the system of collective bargaining. There are many reforms there that in themselves would be harsh, but the overall package is what's so drastic. And I'd say that's the reason why we see these unprecedented measures.
On the other side of the debate, Finland's employer groups and business leaders were in favor of the government's plans, arguing they were needed to kickstart the Finnish economy.
And of course, let's not forget that ultimately all of the government's proposals were either passed into law or they are currently going through the legislative process. But now, staying in March, we also looked into the issue of homelessness in Finland, particularly in light of many reports in international media that Finland had solved the problem.
But we found that wasn't quite the case, especially for the immigrant population.
Yes, indeed we did, because we revealed that while the numbers of homeless people were dropping across almost every demographic, the trend for immigrants was accelerating in the opposite direction. We heard from Heini Puurunen of the NGO No Fixed Abode about why this was happening.
The lack of affordable housing. There is lack of services, especially for people who need more like heavy kind of support, but also for those who are just in need of more information and advice and basically don't know where to look for it.
Finland's berry picking industry was also under the spotlight this spring as years of allegations and suspicions about how foreign berry pickers working in Finnish forests were being exploited finally came to a head.
Yeah, that's because Finnish authorities finally took a stand, with the foreign ministry saying it would no longer issue visas to berry pickers from Thailand, Cambodia or Myanmar as a means of preventing further exploitation and abuse. Now, this led to complaints from the companies themselves that they may no longer be able to operate, or that the vast majority of Finland's berry crop would go unpicked. We heard from Jussi Tanner of the Foreign Ministry.
If you ask me whether it will be sustainable to continue a system where you haul a vulnerable workforce from the other side of the world, paying an absolute bare minimum to them, and then at the same time of basing that industry at this receiving end on everyman's right and on really a creative interpretation of everyman's right, I think that system as a whole has come to its conclusion, has come to its end.
And now we move into April, which got off to a very sad and tragic start.
This morning, 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, there was emergency call to the police that there was a shooting incident in the school named Viertolan koulu in Vantaa. And according to the first information, we understood that there are some people who are injured in this occasion.
Yes, children across the country were just returning to classrooms after the Easter break when reports emerged of a shooting at the Viertola school in Vantaa. One 12-year-old 6th grade pupil died and 2 others were injured after being shot by their classmate, a 12-year-old boy who managed to obtain the gun from a close relative.
The incident really shocked the country and it made headlines around the world, thereby casting a spotlight on Finland's gun culture. We heard from Ian Overton, the executive director of a London-based research charity called Action on Armed Violence.
The idea that children can get their hands on handguns is a problem. And if anyone says, oh, it's the exception, not the norm, tell that to the parents who are mourning their dead child. You know, exceptions still root tragedies. It's exceptional for many things to occur, and yet we litigate against them. One of the things which I thought was problematic, there was an immediate attempt towards saying that this is a mental health issue. Nobody really wanted to grasp the metal and say, actually, this might well be a gun issue.
We also marked Finnish Language Day during April when we heard from foreigners who have overcome the language's fearsome reputation to create their own niche. Vanessa Cueva Pastor moved to Finland from Peru in 2019, and despite feeling initially overwhelmed by the prospect of learning Finnish, she now produces Finnish language content on Instagram.
In Finland, we don't say the spring is here. Instead, we say nahkatakikkeli. Ei! Nahkatakikkeli. Voi ei! Uudestaan nahkatakikkeli.
On a separate but somewhat related topic, we also looked into the challenge of making friends in Finland, especially as many studies have found that newcomers often report feelings of social isolation.
We heard from a number of different people who gave tips on how to make friends in Finland, including harnessing the power of collective interests, such as sports teams or book clubs.
And Joel Williams of the Very Finnish Problems franchise joined us to tell us how he broke down those social barriers.
I don't know how practical this is. This is for people, but the most shockingly easy way of meeting people so far has been getting a dog, going to a dog park, and suddenly, everyone's chatting to everyone. And of course, the key theme being that everyone has a dog and everyone's interacting with their dogs and talking about their dogs. And you're often in the dog park for quite some time, and especially when you live in if you live in the same. When you're all together in the same neighborhood, you go to the same dog parks and you all go to the same dog parks regularly because your dogs need to go out regularly. So, yeah, it's inevitable that you actually end up meeting people. So, I mean, I've made friends through dogs, which have then carried on beyond dogs.
So we're now moving into May, and we were back on the campaign trail. This time it was the European parliamentary elections where experts were predicting a significant shift to the right. Markus Ojala, an EU researcher from the University of Helsinki, told us what this meant from a Finnish perspective.
I think that there's been a major shift within the radical right in Europe more broadly, and that also concerns the Finns party in Finland. The nature of Euroscepticism has really shifted decisively. It is no longer so much about this issue of should the country be part of the European Union. And it's now more about this agenda of actually defending the national interest within the European Union and saying no to all these kinds of sort of cooperations that involve money transfers, for instance, between the member states.
Now, we'll come back to the European election when we get to June, but in May we also looked into the issue of cybersecurity, as large-scale incidents of hacking and data breaches were continually making the headlines in Finland.
The most prominent example was the trial of Aleksanteri Kivimäki, who was found guilty in April of hacking psychotherapy center Vastaamo's patient database and attempting to blackmail both the company and its clients. That case made Finnish legal history for the largest number of victims in a criminal proceeding.
Jenny Raiskio, a lawyer representing some of the victims in that trial, told us about the real-life consequences that cybercrime can have.
It has been very large scale, of course, because people are different and everybody reacts differently, and depending on their capability to handle these kind of things, there has been those who are like, okay, this happened, and so just be it. And then there are people that had very severe reactions. They weren't able to go to work, for example. Some are still unable to work, and some of them end up in suicides.
I think we're in June now when we decided to put away our phones for a while and learn about a growing trend in Finland for people to abstain from social media. Tampere University researcher Leena Ripatti-Torniainen told us about the research study she led, which looked into what motivates people to turn off their notifications.
I think it's a very welcome trend in a way that it seems that people have really spent large amount of hours on social media, especially young people. We even hear stories about a teenager using 7 hours each day on Instagram or something like that.
And June also saw the results of the European elections, and that far-right wave that had been predicted to wash over Europe did not make it to Finland's shores. The Finns party performed quite poorly, finishing with just over 7% of the vote and just one seat in the new parliament.
Left Alliance leader Li Andersson, meanwhile, received more votes than any other Finnish candidate had ever attracted in a European election, as her party won 3 seats in the European legislature. She told us why she thought the vote went the way it did.
I think you could really see, looking at the overall election result in Finland, I think you can see voters being very unhappy with the politics that the current government is doing in Finland, and also kind of voting against a similar turn to the right on European level. Because this was one of the biggest issues in the election in Finland, was that whether there will be a similar cooperation between the far right and the traditional right in the European Parliament on the whole level of Europe that we have seen now for a year here in Finland, that we have seen what it means for workers' rights. We have seen what it means for people with low income, with historically heavy cuts. And we've also seen how they've done a turn in terms of environment and climate policy, a turn backwards.
And all of that brings us up to the summer break. So this podcast, in a very Finnish way, generally takes a holiday from midsummer onwards. So before doing that, we heard about some of the weird and wacky sports that keep people occupied in this corner of the world during the summer months. Such as the wife-carrying competition, the boot-throwing World Cup, and of course the World Swamp Soccer Championship.
Tuija Heikkinen, who works with the Swamp Soccer Championship, which might be my favorite, told us why she thinks these quirky sports capture people's imaginations.
Yeah, I think it tells something about our sense of humor. So we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we definitely know how to laugh to ourselves. But the other thing I think is that the Finnish summer is so short, and we want to experience as much as possible within these few months. So like in my personal opinion, I think we want and maybe even like need to have these fun and new experiences, because these are the memories that are the ones that help us to get through the long, dark, cold winter time. It is actually quite funny that not only the nature wakes up in the summer or spring, but the people as well.
Yeah, it's true.
So you can definitely see.
Now that is indeed very true, because as we sit here in the APN studio in dark and gloomy December, I do have very fond memories of last summer when the sun seemed to shine for months on end. But I guess that's kind of just a trick of memory.
Well, not really, Ronan, because last summer set a new record in Finland for the number of hot days, or days that exceeded the official threshold of 25 degrees Celsius for hot weather. The final total was about 66 of these hot days.
Okay, it wasn't just me. The sun did shine for months on end.
Towards the end of the summer, we looked at how people discover the joy of swimming later in life. Finland is famous as the land of 1,000 lakes, and the idea that everyone here can swim has become woven into the cultural fabric to the point that non-swimmers experience a lot of stigma.
Indeed, and learning that new skill as an adult can be quite humbling, not to mention difficult.
We heard from our listener Nalea, who took the plunge here as an adult, and we also got some expert tips for those wanting to jump in.
When I learned how to float, I was crying because first I had overcome my fear of water. I had overcome the fear of, everything that had held me back from swimming. And it was such an experience that I remember shouting and crying.
We also heard from Tampere-based swim coach Andrew Harrison in that show. He's been teaching many newcomers to Finland.
I know how difficult it is to be able to go to the pool either by yourself or with somebody else when you're very nervous about it, because the fear is very real. The main thing is just learning how to put your face inside the water and blow bubbles. So a good pair of goggles, I think is really important. Cheap goggles are just a nightmare, and you don't have to spend a lot, but good enough goggles. And learning how to just breathe out and relax under the water, because you can spend 10, 20 seconds inside the water calmly, but your natural reaction.
By September, it was time to get back to work, and we explored the challenges faced by many foreign workers here.
Yeah, we heard from foreigners in Finland struggling to find a job in a very tough labour market as the amount of job vacancies continued to fall and an increasing number of people faced redundancy.
Now, while Finland says it needs international workers as it falls behind other countries in attracting talent, the government is at the same time looking to tighten work-based residency rules, making the country less appealing for foreign workers.
So here's Owen Hopiaketto of TEK, a union for engineers and architects, talking about Finland's foreign worker paradox.
Finland has taken years and years to build up this reputation of happiest country. And I feel it's already been damaged, possibly, or at least it's not going to be fixed quickly, this reputational damage.
And since that show aired, things unfortunately haven't really improved in the Finnish job market, with the unemployment rate now nearing 9%.
Would you like a weekly summary of the top stories from Finland sent straight to your inbox? Just sign up for our weekly newsletter. Go to yle.fi/news and look for the newsletter tab at the top of the page. That's yle.fi/news.
One big question on a lot of foreigners' minds here this autumn was Finnish citizenship. We untangled recent changes to Finnish citizenship rules that were creating confusion.
They certainly were. And despite the government's rhetoric about increasing residency requirements to 8 years, most people can still apply for Finnish nationality after living in Finland for 5 years. But the messaging was mixed, to say the least, as our listener Jared Luxton related.
It brings a lot of uncertainty to folks like me who are sort of trying to build a new life here in Finland and trying to understand how many years things add up to. I mean, it makes quite a difference when you're planning the future, especially when you have like a small family.
Now, in our citizenship special in October, we also got some expert tips on how to ace the YKI test, which is short for the National Certificate of Language Proficiency, which is needed for getting Finnish nationality.
Okay, so to summarize this very important issue, it's possible to apply for Finnish citizenship after 5 years if you have obtained the language proficiency certificate in either Finnish or Swedish. But you really should listen to this episode if you want to know more, because we also explore the urban myth of whether something like a speeding ticket could put the brakes on your path to Finnish citizenship.
And rain. And while many people here can book a doctor's appointment with a few clicks, a great number can't and face long waiting times to see a healthcare professional.
Yeah. So now, as a Nordic welfare state, Finland's system guarantees high-level universal healthcare services. It's seen as one of the big draws for people who come here to live and work. But this promise does not reflect many people's reality. Here's our listener, Elizabeth.
I would say that my faith in the public system here is rapidly diminishing. And it's not because of lack of talent or lack of potential. or even lack of resources. I think it's a matter of allocation of resources. Finland actually has so much going for it in terms of healthcare, and for so long has been a model of public healthcare for the world. It was one of the things that we looked at when we decided to move here, but I think that that's rapidly changing. And I can't help but wonder if we had moved 5 or 10 years ago, if our experience would have been different.
Figures show that an increasing portion of people in Finland are covered by private health insurance over and above any cover provided by their employer's occupational healthcare policies. That brings us to Health Chief Mika Salminen, who's spoken out about what he sees as misallocated health resources in Finland. He's the Director General of the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, and he told us he wants to see that system reformed so that those who really need care can get it.
But before we move on, I think it's worth mentioning at this point that just this week the government narrowly won a controversial healthcare vote in Parliament, which will see services reduced at several regional hospitals, including round-the-clock care.
But as the days grew ever shorter during November, we stayed focused on health and asked whether comedy could be the key to surviving the dark Finnish winter. Here's comedian Jamie MacDonald.
Finns really do laugh at themselves. Like, they love to be seen from people who can see them from the outside, and then they're very gratified that you've seen something or that you recognize something. This is kind of universal, though. Like, if you go anywhere on the planet, people love to be observed. I think the Finnish sense of humor is quite wide, actually, and I think they already are exposed to quite a lot of humor from the UK and the US, but especially even British humor. Like, my grandmother here was a big fan of British humor.
Ronan, you checked out Finland's stand-up comedy scene. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I did. And, well, it was very interesting. But one thing that really struck me when I was working on that show was the amount of people who made some reference to the Finnish sense of humour. And usually it was that they had at some point in their life thought that Finns don't have a sense of humour. Which I guess isn't all that surprising, really, given that Finns do sort of have a reputation for being a bit reserved, a bit stoic perhaps. But what I learned from that episode is that the Finnish sense of humour is a bit more subtle, because the delivery of jokes can be quite deadpan, so you sort of have to get used to it. An accustomed taste, I guess.
It's an acquired taste.
Acquired taste, that's it, yeah. But anyway, I really enjoyed working on that one, and going to the comedy gigs definitely lifted my mood during November.
And so we're now in December. This month, Finland celebrated its 107th Independence Day, so we took a deep dive into Väinö Linna's masterpiece, The Unknown Soldier, to mark the occasion. The novel was originally published in 1954, becoming an instant classic with its beloved characters taking the reader through an uncompromising, realistic, and unsentimental portrayal of the brutalities of war.
I got it as a Christmas present 20 years ago.
Have you read it?
I read it that Christmas, yes. It's a tale of Finnish unity and renewal, especially after the horrors of the 1917 to 1918 Civil War. And the book came to symbolise the unification of Finland after that conflict. That's why it's such an integral part of Independence Day. And so to illustrate this, we asked Liselle Yamaguchi, who retranslated the book into English in 2015, to read us an excerpt.
So this is chapter 10, Mannerheim's birthday, and a drinking party for our platoon of the machine gunners. Shackles of the nation tremble with frustration. Finland's cup of misery has reached its very brim. Casting off the chains of tyrants, Finland rallies up the finest forces in the noble nation braced for battle's grim. Good Lord, boy, that's the rebel song you're singing, Rokka exclaimed. But Koskela motioned Vanhala to continue. He found the rhythm in his fingers and was tapping in time with Vanhala's song, even humming along here and there.
And that was Liselle Yamaguchi reading us an excerpt from The Unknown Soldier. If you want to hear the rest of that excerpt and catch that episode, you can find it on Yle Areena or wherever you get your podcasts.
So with time running out this year, let's have a quick look ahead at next and some of the big stories we have ahead of us.
All right, well, we've just picked a few major events, but next spring, Finland will go to the polls for local and county elections. That will be interesting as Finland now has a right-wing government, but Yle's most recent party sentiment poll found the opposition Social Democratic Party in the lead for the fourth consecutive month, with its backing now at 24%.
And there will be a lot of focus on the Finnish economy next year. The central bank has said that Finland is slowly crawling out of recession, projecting 0.8% growth next year. That's slightly less optimistic than the European Commission's forecast of 1.5%. But the Bank of Finland also said that it believes inflation will stay below 2% in 2025, which should add to some economic stability.
Well, that's some good news. This autumn, we saw the general value added tax rate, or VAT, increase from 24 to 25.5%. And January will see goods and services currently taxed at a reduced rate of 10% increase to 14%.
And we're also going to see VAT on chocolate go up to 25.5% from 14%.
That will make a dent in my budget.
Yeah.
On the defense front, NATO will set up a new land command in Mikkeli near the Russian border next year. Finland is also planning to increase defense spending by nearly €500 million next year.
But we will be here to follow it all. And for now, we've come to the end of 2024. If you had a favourite episode this year, do please let us know. But for now, I'll just say a very big thank you to you, the All Points North audience, for listening to and supporting this show throughout this year. I'd also like to give a big thanks to our audio engineer today, Juha Sarkkinen. We will be back in early 2025, so Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.